Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kidde's Elevating Home Safety Why New Standards Matter webinar. Today, you'll hear from experts at Kidde and UL Solutions, who will delve into the new UL 217 9th edition standard for smoke alarms and how these updates translate into innovative product enhancements. Our experts include Dan Michael, Principal Engineer from UL Solutions, and Matt Heisman, Vice President, Global Marketing and Product Management at Kidde. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available for viewing as soon as possible. If you have questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible during our live Q&A session at the end. Please also consider taking the survey that will pop up when the webinar concludes. Your feedback is valuable and helps us make these webinars as useful and relevant as possible. And with that, I'll pass things off to Dan from UL Solutions to explain the importance of standards and the specific of the latest UL 217 standard.
Thank you, Thomas. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar, and also thank you for providing UL Solutions the opportunity to participate. My name is Dan Michael, and I'm the Principal Engineer for UL Solutions. I've been with UL for approximately 26 years, spending the majority of my career in engineering operations, where I manage the product certifications of life safety products. My area of purview as the Principal Engineer of UL Solutions is in smoke alarm and detectors, heat alarm and detectors, and notification appliances, speakers, strobes, and horns. Today, I will discuss why standards matter, provide a high-level summary of the new and current UL 217 standard editions, and I'll end with information on the technical committee members, the process for submitting proposals, and how the publication of the requirements is achieved. I want to provide a historic overview of the UL 217 standard, which is the standard for smoke alarms. UL 217 first edition was published in the 1970s and has evolved throughout the years. As emerging technology and changes in real-world applications evolve, UL Solutions participates in the standards development process to review requirements and propose the necessary changes. The latest editions of the UL 217 standard were revised based on extensive fire research and data collection. The growing prevalence of synthetic-based materials has altered the dynamics, with fires burning more rapidly and producing a greater amount of toxic smoke than traditional materials, such as cotton, wood, and other types, making it essential to update the UL standard continually. Next slide, please. In 2020, the UL Fire Safety Research Institute team captured a new side-by-side burn comparison of natural versus synthetic furnished rooms. Since the original comparison video was shared in 2009, the UL Fire Safety Research Institute has repeated the same experiment several times with similar results in terms of flashover times between the natural and synthetic furnished rooms. The flashover data for those experiments has been incorporated into the video, which is readily available on YouTube, capturing much crisper detail than its predecessor, thanks to significant advancements in video technology. And as a result, the impetus for revising the UL 217 standard was driven by these changing dynamic of home fires. Next slide. UL 217 8th edition was published on October 30th of 2015. There were over 200 technical changes, prompting manufacturers to ensure that the construction of their products were able to meet the new requirements. New fire test scenarios were added to the UL 217 8th edition, specifically a flaming polyurethane foam test, a smoldering polyurethane foam test, and a cooking nuisance fire test. Also new to the 8th edition was the introduction of a new detection terminology and technology known as multi-criteria type detection. This complex smoke sensing technique utilizes various sensors, including but not limited to carbon monoxide, heat, flame, or other sensor types. These contributing sensors aid in distinguishing between a cooking event and a real fire condition, ultimately helping reduce cooking nuisance alarms. Another significant technical change to the 8th edition was the necessity to protect against electrical hazards, such as lightning strikes or overloaded circuits, observed on commercial AC power lines. These new requirements address the need to safely contain the hazard, ensuring that the AC power device was not the source of ignition. Next slide, please. The UL 217 9th edition was published on January 2nd of 2020, which includes all the previous 8th edition requirements and introduced a new fire test scenario. The cooking nuisance test was designed to help mitigate false alarms by cooking nuisance sources. However, there were further enhancements required to ensure that the device or devices under test were able to distinguish between the cooking event and a real fire condition. A new fire test called the Go No-Go Flaming Polyurethane test was introduced to the UL 217 9th edition. And this Go No-Go Flaming Polyurethane test is conducted immediately following the conclusion of the cooking nuisance test to assess the alarm's ability to distinguish between those two unique fire and non-fire events. Additionally, more technical changes were incorporated, such as low-frequency audibility tests, commercial and recreational vehicle tests, and integral self-test requirements. Next slide, please. UL 217 10th edition, which is the latest edition, was published on November 27th of 2024. The 10th edition includes all previous 8th and 9th edition requirements and now consists of the US and Canada harmonized set of requirements. All the fire test scenarios that we discussed are applicable for both the US or Canadian certified smoke alarms for the 10th edition. Next slide. So now I'd like to discuss the technical committee, the process for submitting proposals, and how the publication of these requirements are achieved. The UL Standards and Engagement has a defined process for publication of new requirements. The standards development process begins with a proposal and culminates in publication. And there are 5 steps to this process, all governed by ANSI, which is the American National Standards Institute. The first step begins with a proposal request and development. Anyone can submit a request through UL Standards and Engagement Collaborative Standards Development System, known as CSDS for short. Stakeholders submit a proposal for a new standard or to amend an existing one. Second step to the process is a preliminary review of the request. The preliminary review is an informal mechanism that provides authors with the opportunity to refine their proposals before they advance to the next stage. The third step undergoes balloting and commenting. Technical committee members vote to approve or reject, or they may abstain from voting on a proposal and provide comments. Stakeholders may provide input via comments, but they cannot vote. The fourth step to this process is a recirculation and commenting resolution stage. If a standard receives negative votes or comments, it enters the recirculation stage, and at this point, technical committee members can reconsider their vote based on responses to comments and changes made to the proposal. And step 5, the last step, is publication and distribution. Once any recirculation phase or phases are completed and a consensus is achieved, the new or revised standard will be published. At this point, it will be distributed via the shopulstandards.com website and amplified through community and policy engagements. Technical committee members are open to volunteers from a variety of different backgrounds, including retail, consumers, regulatory, medical professionals, manufacturers, and many more. So a common question that we received is, what does a technical member do? And technical committee members review, vote, and comment on standard proposals and revisions. And it's a great way to network within the professional community. Participation is primarily virtual through the CSDS, that Collaborative Standards Development System, and typically only requires approximately 30 hours annually, and there is no cost. Another question received, who are standards stakeholders? And if you want to start small, there's still room for you to get involved as a stakeholder. They can submit, review, and comment on proposals for new standards or revisions to existing standards. While these individuals cannot vote, the technical committee considers their input during the standards voting process. Since standards affect everyone, all are welcome to participate as stakeholders. And lastly, what is the process for applying to be a technical committee member? The applications for the technical committee are processed through the UL Standards and Engagement Portal. More information on the technical committee and the overall process can all be found on ulse.org. Next slide, please. Currently, the UL 217 roster consists of a balanced committee of AHJs, authorities having jurisdiction, testing and standard organization members, commercial and industrial users, general users, government representatives, supply chain, manufacturers, and various other interested parties. The Collaborative Standards Development System tracks and publishes the multi-step discussion process for each ballot. Captured in the images seen on the screen are the historic UL 217 standards activity. Also on the screen is the active UL 217 edition proposals. Again, all readily available through the CSDS Collaborative Standards Development System. Next slide, please. Well, thank you everyone for listening to the high-level summary of the new and current UL 217 standard editions and the information on the technical committee members, along with the process for submitting proposals and how publication of the new or revised requirements are achieved. And now I'd like to turn it over to Matt Heisman of Kidde.
Thank you, Dan. And just thanks for taking the time to come through. It's always a benefit to all of us when we get to hear from the experts in the field, especially our governing certifying bodies. Just to say hi to everyone. So I'm Matt Heisman. I'm our leader of our product management and marketing teams here at Kidde. And today I'm going to talk through to build on what Dan just led us through, but how we at Kidde are thinking about the standards, why we think they are so important, and what we're doing to address these codes and standards that UL is putting forth for us. So the first thing I was going to talk about here is a little bit farther back, like going through the history of kind of as we go through the path of everything and where we got to with the 9th edition. So it's always good to look back and kind of just understand how we got here. So really, if you think about it, 1902 is when this first smoke detector was invented. 1965 was when the first residential smoke alarms were invented. So if you think about this for mass adoptions, really starting in the 1970s, smoke detectors really haven't been the staple of our households or our communities for that long in our history. And really the standards, those first set of standards for what these need to be and how they need to perform, didn't come until 1967. The UL 217 standard that we have these 9 editions for started in 1973. And this is really where we started getting that bigger national, more holistic standard across the board. NFPA mandates didn't start until 1976. And then we got into our rounds of codes, really to 2015 is when 8th edition was really the first update of it was in there when we first announced it. But really, it took us a while to get into implementation. COVID and all of those things slowed us down. And really, that 2024 is when 8th and 9th edition both went live. Now, as we think through this history and the timeline of everything, a couple key things to keep in mind is one, there are really 2 types of technology when we get into our smoke detectors. It's photoelectric and ionization alarms. And really, as we think about all of the revisions and everything that Dan's team works through and monitors and keeps in mind as they're thinking through their process of everything, is through these times and through these types of alarms, things have changed. Modern homes are different, materials we use to build are different, the way fire burns are different. And that's why each one of these standards are so important, because they keep addressing changes to the environment, to our houses around us. And really, and Dan kind of mentioned it, but really as we get to that 9th edition standard, it's really enhancements in sensing technology, testing protocols, and especially around the idea of these nuisance alarms and how we detect and can tell the difference just to maintain and keep our houses safe. Want to jump to the next slide? Yeah. So really, this is kind of our click and the way we thought about it here at Kidde on how we wanted to attack these standards and think about these standards as a whole. And really, as I said, really the 8th and 9th edition, the first ones went live June of last year. And really with these, there were some major changes within these when we thought about it from a technical standpoint and how we developed the devices. So there's 250 different technical changes that we needed to hit to do these test requirements to make sure that we can meet these new standards. Kidde ourselves, we did these revisions starting in October of 22 is when we started going through these and really launched them last year in 2024. But really going after how can we get slow smoldering fires and fast flaming fires? How can we identify them consistently and detect both types of fires? Because they burn different, the smoke particles are different, the way the smoke reaches your ceiling are different. With this, we needed firmware updates, testing specifications, and then just really that sensitivity in our calibrations to really make sure that we can, one, meet these standards, meet the nuisance alarm portions of it, but also make sure we have the safest device that we feel like we can make on our side in the market. And really what drove these and why this one in particular matters the most is really the fact that we're burning quicker and hotter and faster than normal. Back in 1978, when we think back to when a lot of these standards really started getting out there, you had about 17 minutes time to escape a house from when a fire started. Now you have less than 2. So as we think through these standards, really that's the crux of everything that we're trying to do with these and how we're trying to meet them is how do we continue to drive innovation to help meet these changing environments in front of us. And really it's more time to get out safely. How can we make sure that these devices don't stop working in the houses through 10-year batteries and self-testing? How do we reduce nuisance alarms? Nuisance alarms are one of the factors that sometimes cause people to take down their smoke alarms and things like that. So how can we make sure that we're not causing these nuisances so the devices stay active? And really kind of getting to our patents and everything else to make sure that we are meeting all of these standards. So I wanted to take a minute as we get into it to really just double click a little into these 2 different types of sensing technology. So we have photoelectric. And the way photoelectric works is it is based on light. So the smoke particles enter into the smoke chamber. We have sensors in there that read the light. And really, as the particles enter, we're sensing and detecting what type of particles and how they are reflecting the light in the device. And this is what allows us to be able to tell the difference from cooking steam and real fire particles, is because we're able to tell the different types of particles based on this technology. With these, and then with ionization as it goes, these are really based off of the interaction with the smoke particles, not so much detecting them with the light, but really how current flows through them within the device to just tell really of a particles present. Can they detect smoke based on what type of ionization is in there in the air? And that's how the ionization works. Now, as we go through these, both types of alarms can detect both slow smoldering and fast flaming fires. Both types work for both types of fires. Photoelectric in general, because it can sense the types of particles, is better at getting slow smoldering ones because you can have less smoke in the chamber than what ion requires. Ion sometimes can get the fast flaming at different times as we go through it, but both work for both types of fires. And then as we get into that 9th edition, photo really, even as we get into these different types of firmware, can really get even stronger into both of these as we go through as well. So Kidde, us ourselves, all our products right now are certified to the 9th edition. We're looking at moving to the 10th as we do whatever our next rounds are. We moved over in June of 2024 with all the technology advances and partnering with UL and NFPA to make sure that we are meeting these standards that are being defined by them. As we go through it, really the crux of everything we're building towards here is really improved detection for modern fires. That fast flaming and smoldering, more time to get out safely is how we're building these devices. It's really getting that self-testing, 10-year life, always detecting, making sure that it's always active. People are protected around the clock, no matter what's going on. Reduce cooking alarms. Like I said, really that's the biggest difference when we got into that no test that Dan was talking about, is really how can we get into it where we can detect a nuisance alarm, but then if a fire starts, it can immediately then detect that fire. So we don't have any gaps in there. And really just kind of making sure our patents are there to make sure we get to the right stuff. So just overall things just about our brand as a whole, just to make sure as we're speaking kind of below the authority that we have. One, we are the #1 home safety brand in North America. Just across it, we've been around for over 100 years, really kind of trying to meet and trying to drive the standards to as high as we can get them to in self-testing, 10-year and 10-year end of life, power surge immunity, really basing all of our products on cutting edge technology, making sure our sensing and firmware line up to be as safe as we can make them. And then really kind of getting around those reduced nuisance alarm and really kind of centering ourselves in how can we drive the standards as far as we can get to. And really, as we think through our newest 9th edition line of products, just so we can talk through what they deliver as a whole, really it's that detecting technology that deciphers between the true fires and the false alarms. We have dust covers just to help with construction dust and debris. This allows for fewer callbacks and just a little bit less upfront possible issues with any devices. The chamber is made of conductive material to help prevent dust buildup. All of these things help reduce the cooking nuisance alarms or any other nuisance alarms in there. And really kind of that chamber is built in a way that allows direct sunlight into it, which allows our photo sensors to work stronger and be able to really not trigger when there's false alarms and really be able to tell those particles apart. And really it's the current draw makes it low risk of depleting your batteries faster. Installations, it's all about the dust cover, really that pre-stripped wire harness, universal mounting brackets across all of our models. And really, we have adapters that allow us to interconnect into the Kidde 6th edition alarms. And then really around the safety portion of this. And really, how can we make sure that we are detecting smoldering fires more quickly, giving users more time to escape in case of fire, and making sure that we are meeting all those standards that are in place. And really, as we think through sustainability, photoelectric, the tech, they don't use radioactive materials like ion does. And also we went away from clamshell plastic packaging, really into something recyclable and more manageable from a sustainability standpoint. Yeah. And the next part, it's really, we've talked about the whole time, but really it's a little more detail and kind of a connecting on why these really matter. I highly, highly recommend everyone on here goes and watch this full video as a whole. But really, these standards are really, really going after and addressing today's home and how fires burn today, how smoke rises even faster in these as well and fill the house, and just that faster, hotter burning fires changes everything about what we do and how we need to think about it. And that's why these standards and why meeting these latest standards are so important. And then with here, it just kind of highlights these in a little bit stronger. It's really getting back to that, as I said earlier, that 17 minutes back in 1978. And really that's because most of these materials inside the house was just solid wood, cotton, wool, those sort of things as we get into our furniture and our fabrics, versus much more today. We have engineered woods, we have foams, we have plastics, we have synthetics materials across everything. And that is why this change happened in there. So as we think through all of these construction materials in the homes, it's like there's hidden risks to these new materials as a whole, just because of these sort of things that we don't think about. They are more efficient, they are great products, but they do burn a little bit faster. And really, it's just these advanced requirements have to continue to get there to keep up. And us as the manufacturer of these products have to continue strive to be able to in these newest standards so we can make sure that we are getting the level of protection that is needed across the board. And yeah, I believe that is all the content I have today. Now I believe we'll give it back to Tom to open up for Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Matt and Dan. Great presentations. So as Matt suggested, we will now shift over to Q&A. We did have a few pre-submitted questions, which we'll get to. And as I mentioned in the chat, please don't be shy. Ask your questions via the Q&A feature, and we'll try to get to those if we can. All right, so the first question I have is for Dan. It says, if using detectors with the new standards, is the placement of photoelectric versus ionization detectors still important? And if so, why?
Yeah, thank you for the question. When we wrote the standards for the UL 217 8th, 9th, and 10th editions, we were very technology agnostic. All the later editions, updates, even though we introduced the new multi-criteria technology and terminology, certification can be achieved regardless of that. So that's essentially that technology agnostic approach. And so circling back, regardless of the detection type, we're able to certify a product should it have that single criteria or multi-criteria.
Great, thank you. We have another pre-submitted question that has to do with interconnected alarms. It says there's both wired and wireless, and what's the ideal solution? Matt, maybe you can take that one.
Sure. I mean, with everything, there are standards within place on how interconnected devices need to be. Hardwired or wire-free, either one of them can work or solve the solution. It really kind of comes down to how your house is wired, what it's set up for, and if hardwired interconnect is available in your house or not. If it's not, then you'd have to go with the wire-free interconnect solutions. But all those are within the standards of everything, both considered. And Dan, do you have any builds on that?
Yeah, and really good point, Matt. It's really in that, looking at the code relative to the standard as well. We're in harmony with, what the code specifies. Both, requirements reside for both hardline interconnect and also requirements reside in the UL 217 standard for wireless interconnected devices.
Great, thank you both. Another question just came in via the Q&A. It says, can you confirm what the main difference between 9th and 10th edition is, and when will the product meet the 10th edition? So maybe Dan, you can tell us about the 10th edition and can go from there.
Sure. And as you saw, the 10th edition slide didn't really have as much content as the previous 8th or 9th. And really the 10th was in working with the technical committees, the harmonization effort to harmonize the requirements for both the US and Canada. And really that's the main core of 10th. And as far as the second half of that question related to, effective dates, well, as far as effective dates, every national recognized testing laboratory establishes their own independent effective dates. So check with your local, what we call NERDL, National Recognized Testing Laboratories, for when those effective dates need to comply with those requirements.
Okay, great. That's good. There's another question that says testing Bluetooth for wireless to interact with other units. So I guess asking whether Bluetooth is the method through which the wireless interconnected alarms interact. Is that the case, or is it some other standard?
Regarding the technology and technology type, those are certainly, as technology emerges, different types of, applications, may be applicable. In that particular case, if Bluetooth, it could very well be a viable path, and that's really why it's really important to talk about the technical committee and the committee process. And if there is, let's say, a gap in any of the requirements, that robust process that we have in place to review requirements or review technology, review emerging technology, and should there be a necessity to expand or add clarity to those standards, that's where it's really important to have that collaboration effort between many different interested parties that I also made mention of, HJs or consumers or manufacturers, all participate to vet those different types of technologies out.
Okay, great. Another question that just came in. Is there a 10-year battery non-hardwired product that is both photo and ionization that meets new standards?
Like for the, I can speak to the Kidde products like as a whole. We have 10-year hardwired products that meet all the standards. They are photoelectric, not photo and ion, but it meets all the current standards, pass all the tests, and would meet any need that is out there.
And I'll
Okay,
follow
great.
up.
Yep. Go.
If there is, our online product certification directory that does have all of the manufacturers, and it will define the specific attributes of those alarms, which can be found through our what we call our UL Product IQ database. And so a quick Google ping on UL Product IQ will lead you to the certification web page, and you can certainly view all the products that are currently UL certified and UL listed.
Great, thank you. Someone said, anecdotally, we are seeing more than 50% of house fires start in the garage. Does Kidde have an easily accessible heat detector product available to the residential market?
We do have a heat detector product that could work. Also, preview, we're working on how to build out one that is designed specifically for unconditioned spaces to help survive those environments as a whole, garages, attics. That's probably a little bit of time away as we get to it, as we get through all the ins and outs of it, but we are working on what can we do more for those. I know that's a thing that's coming up here in the US, also in Canada. That's also one of the things we talk about with up there as well, quite a bit on a need that we have for the market.
Fantastic. All right, here's a pretty technical contractor question. It says, many contractors do not install on a dedicated circuit. Do we have built-in engineering similar to the power surge immunity to reduce any voltage issues from installing on a non-dedicated circuit?
Well, I could touch on that, and then Matt, if you'd like to follow up. I think from the code perspective, 72, I think that those all reside in what we call Chapter 29, single multiple position smoke alarms that define brand circuits. And as far as the surge immunity tests that were introduced into the 8th edition, we're emulating a lot of these surges, the overloaded circuits, or even those lightning strikes that are really stressing on the AC component side, those input surges.
Yeah, and I was going to say there is standards in the place like Dan had on what the surge protection in the devices need to be that came with the 8th and 9th editions, and all of our product meet those surge requirements.
Great. All right, just a couple more here. Um, when I'm looking to purchase a ninth edition smoke alarm, what do I need to look for to identify that the product is the ninth edition?
So on all of our products in particular, on the packaging itself, it calls out what edition and what standard it meets. So it'll call out that it conforms to UL 217 ninth edition standard. So if you look on the primary packaging, all of them should have that in there. If it's not found on any of the packaging you're looking at for other products, the best place to go is online or into the user manual. It should list what's there. If you can't find them any of those spots, if you go on to, and Dan can speak to this more, if you go onto the UL website or any of the certifying bodies website, they have a registry of all listed products that you can confirm whether they're actually listed or
Correct, Matt. Yeah, we do have within our product directory specific tables that do identify the additions that they have been certified to.
Excellent. Another question for you, Dan. What advice does Dan have for stakeholders navigating multiple effective dates? Can you describe UL's role in supporting the industry's move to the latest edition of the standard?
Sure. I mean, we definitely receive a lot of input from many different stakeholders, of which we analyze, and we also want to ensure that our effective dates are in line with safeguarding the marketplace. That's one of the more critical items is ensuring that some of these effective dates that tend to creep up, let's say, on manufacturers. Really, it's not intended to have more of a stress on manufacturers, but it's more in line with ensuring that these new requirements, as critical as they are able to products are able to comply with, which in turn safeguards the overall marketplace and consumers.
Excellent. Another one, it says, how are you seeing ninth edition product performing in the field, and what continuous testing is being done to validate the performance?
so they're performing very well overall. We have seen, for us in particular, for Kidde, we've seen less callbacks, less issues, less reports, less call-ins across the board as we go through it. So it's been performing very well in the field overall. Continuous testing, we're always doing continuous testing. We're always looking at what else can we do to build out better devices. We build out a healthy roadmap as a whole to continue to address and continue to push kind of our limits across all of our products. So the continuous testing is always ongoing, regardless of edition, regardless of what's going on in the market too. We're always looking at how we can continue to validate and improve.
Excellent. Very good. One more for Dan, perhaps. It says, how does UL decide when to update standards or when updated standards are needed?
That's a great question. I mean, we're really looking at technology trends, or really in 2015, and when 2015, when the eighth edition was published at the time, there was an extensive amount of research that with UL Fire Safety Research Institute that really demonstrated and showed what even Matt had touched on with these new synthetic materials, engineering wood. The video, again, I highly encourage everyone to review and watch the video, is really a big driver for, that was one of many different drivers. But then, analyzing the marketplace, looking at technology trends, and it's constant. The standards involvement, we're constantly updating standards when different technology emerges, or if there's revisions necessary to revisit certain requirements. So, and that's why it's also really important to have that balanced committee where you have interested parties all coming together and having a consensus-based approach to new or revised requirements.
Nice. All right, I got another one. It says, what are the future trends for smoke alarm technology?
That is a great question. We could probably talk about for the next hour if we wanted to as we go through it. The way we see about it is really it's there's a lot of ins and outs in here, but really it's kind of how do we continue to think about the sensing technology around all the alarms? Like Dan said earlier, they didn't build in necessarily the exact like, oh, it must be the sensor. Like the code is the code across everything. So the way we're thinking about really that future trends as we're looking at it is one, how can we make sure that we have the right protection in every place people need it? So the question earlier on heat alarms for the garages. It's things like that as we think about when we're building out technology is how do we make sure we're seeing more needs in more places like garages? How do we make sure we have a product that fits that need? The other is then how do we continue to build in future state technology and trends like AI into our detectors, which is much farther out as we get to it. But how do we build some of those technologies and machine learning into them to help just detect fires better, reduce the number of nuisance alarms, and just really think about how can we find that balance between the two.
And
Excellent.
Matt, maybe I can just add on to that. We touched on those unconditioned spaces, and yet, that was yet another effort that the technical committee really worked on for heat alarms, looking at the different dynamics within unconditioned spaces and crafting requirements, and from the heat alarm standard perspective, have been published to identify those certain parameters into testing to those extreme conditions. And so it's obviously a constant work in progress, as we work through it on the technical committee side.
Thank you both. All right. Another one for you, Dan. It says, when was the synthetic materials fire test last tested by UL? Has the test changed or been updated in any way?
Well, 2015 introduced the synthetic materials, the smoldering polyurethane, flaming polyurethane foam. And then in the 9th edition, we introduced that go, no go flaming polyurethane foam test. So it really started in 2015, and it's been the same sequence of tests that reside in both all three 8th, 9th, and 10th editions.
Okay, very good. Another one we had is, what are the risks of having non-certified products in the market?
I mean, the easiest answer there is they're certified because they were tested in a certified lab and met the UL standard. So if you have anything that ends up being uncertified to it, you run the risk of them not performing the way that they are supposed to in the market. So you take a risk there because it hasn't been proven that it actually can meet the standards that are in place.
Yeah, and maybe Matt, I'll follow up with it. That was exactly one of the points that I touched on in the AC's power surges. We don't want that alarm to be the source of ignition. And so an uncertified product, it's just unknown, should you encounter that surge, if that could potentially have, be that source of ignition. So many risk factors associated.
All right, thank you both, and thank you everyone for attending. I think with that, it's going to be time for us to wrap up. So thank you again to our presenters, Matt and Dan. And as I mentioned earlier, this webinar will be made available at a later date, which we will let you know about. And when the webinar concludes, please consider taking the survey, which will pop up. Thank you again to everybody, and have a great day.